Welcome back. In the fight against cancer, there's a lot of promising research right now in adapting a patient's own cells to kill the cancerous ones. And in clinical trials, it's proven to be particularly effective in a form of childhood leukemia that was previously considered to be incurable. Now, it's still very expensive and it's only being used as a last resort. But as Dr. Marla Shapiro reports for W5, there is the promise that the technique might someday be applicable to other cancers.
Meet Jordan. She's about to board a flight. And like any kid, she's excited about the trip ahead. But Jordan isn't like most children.
We hoped for a girl, and so along came Jordan, and we cried.
Yep.
Dad. We both cried.
Absolutely.
In September 2013, Jordan joined her parents, Tammy and Stephen McInerney, and older brothers, twins Jacob and Noah. The family was complete.
And life was wonderful until what happened that made you think there's a problem?
Mm-hmm. So in, I guess, around December or early January, we started to notice some bruising on her body.
Jordan's doctor referred the McInerneys to their local hospital in Barrie, Ontario, about 90 kilometers north of Toronto.
10 minutes later, they walked in and said, all of her blood counts are off. If it was one, it might be an infection, but because they're all off, it's cancer.
It was unthinkable. 4-month-old Jordan had cancer. Stephen stayed behind at the Barrie Hospital while Tammy and Jordan left in an ambulance bound for Toronto's renowned Hospital for Sick Children.
I stood in the bay at the hospital watching the ambulance leave, and
And it was hard. It was hard.
Doctors at Sick Kids confirmed the diagnosis. Baby Jordan had leukemia.
And we told her that day, start fighting.
Jordan started chemotherapy right away. After 2 years, a breakthrough. The cancer was gone. But relief soon turned to panic. Jordan developed a worryingly high fever. Her leukemia was back. Jordan needed a bone marrow transplant and a donor. Doctors tested both of her brothers, twins Jacob and Noah. Only Jacob was a match.
So we did our best to make them both a part of it. So Jacob would be the bone marrow donor, but Noah was going to be the strength and the courage for both his brother and his sister.
Once again, Jordan's cancer went away. She was in remission. The Sick Kids Foundation even made this video about her in 2016. But then, Jordan's legs started to hurt.
So our all-promising bone marrow from Jordan's 5-year-old brother was not a success. She had relapsed again.
The cancer had returned yet again. Jordan was just 3 years old and had spent her whole life on a journey that few families can imagine. Chemotherapy, Christmases in the hospital, with no end in sight. The future was uncertain. In nearby Newmarket, Ontario, Cameron Lottie and his parents Debbie and Richard are all too familiar with that journey.
He was having these severe stomach pains in the middle of the night.
And how old was he now?
He's 3 at this point.
In 2010, Debbie took Cameron to the hospital.
I got pulled aside and was told, and it's the phrasing I'll never even forget. It's, I'm sorry to tell you, but your son has cancer of the blood. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, our life went in a very different direction.
Cameron was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the most common childhood cancer. He began treatment at Sick Kids. The plan, 3.5 years of chemotherapy.
I mean, he was really a trooper. In fact, at one point I had even said, are you sure he's not getting a placebo?
All went according to plan. Cameron's cancer went away.
3.5 years, that's behind us. Let's move on with life. Let's get, Cameron back with school, Cameron back with his friends.
But just 6 months later, Cameron started having blackouts. A spinal tap confirmed that his leukemia had returned. he went back to sick kids for more chemotherapy, and this time he also received radiation.
And that treatment was so much more intensive than anything he had seen.
And what did you understand at that point about what this meant for his prognosis?
It wasn't good.
Midway through this new course of treatment, Cameron relapsed yet again. He was running out of options. Doctors raised the possibility of a brand new type of experimental cancer therapy, one for children like Cameron, who had failed the standard treatments. It was still only in clinical trial at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CAR T-cell therapy.
In order to do this, they need to harvest Cameron's T cells and then send those down for analysis to see if this can even work on him, right?
CAR T, or chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapy, is a type of immunotherapy in which a patient's own immune cells, their T cells, are extracted from their blood using a special machine. Scientists then genetically alter those T cells and train them to recognize and kill cancer cells. The genetically re-engineered T cells are then injected back into the patient's body. The modified cells multiply and, when successful, stay in the patient's body, theoretically, for life. Unlike traditional chemotherapy, CAR T cells are not a drug or a pill. Because the therapy is done using the patient's own altered cells, it is a unique, personalized process. A scientist has to make each individual dose using the actual patient's blood. Dr. Carl June is a professor and researcher at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. His lab worked with other researchers to create the groundbreaking CAR T-cell therapy. Their experiments on mice only began in 2004.
We started out and basically no one paid attention to us because no one actually thought this would ever work.
But the treatment looked so promising that after only 6 years, Dr. June's lab began human trials. To keep up with demand, they partnered with pharmaceutical company Novartis, who now market CAR T under the brand name Kymriah.
We had really good data to say these CAR T cells had caused remission in patients who were incurable. That led Novartis to say, well, maybe we should give this a shot.
The first clinical trials were in adults, and then, because the therapy looked so effective for people without time to spare, trials in children began much sooner than usually happens.
With so few adults having been treated, the concept of doing this clinical trial in children, was it surprising?
It was almost without precedent. So kids who have relapse with leukemia in general have a survival that maybe 1 out of 20 would be alive 2 years later. So that's where we had to start with, was these, very advanced cases who had run out of all options.
Dr. June's lab partnered with neighboring Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, or CHOP, to run the clinical trial. Dr. Stephen Grupp is the director of the Cancer Immunotherapy Program at CHOP.
When did you have sort of that moment that this is a game changer in oncology for these kids?
Well, honestly, the first patient. I've been at this for a while. I've never seen anything like this in my life.
The first CAR T patient's cancer went away within days of the treatment. Dr. Grupp personally injected those modified T cells.
This was the unknown. I think we had a little bit of an idea that this could work from the first 3 adults that we treated. We had very little idea of what the potential toxicities might be, and we learned a lot from that first pediatric case.
CAR T-cell has had astounding results in some clinical trials, but not every patient had the miraculous turnaround. In one study, 38% of children relapsed. Some went on to other therapies, but all remained at high risk of dying of their disease.
Almost everybody goes into remission. The challenge is that in some patients, their leukemia learns how to hide from the CAR T cells.
Right.
And in that situation, the fix is to have a second target, and that's something that we're working on right now.
Still, the first patient has now been cancer-free for 6 years. Some cancers can be considered cured after 5 years of remission.
We tend to think of 5 as a landmark for many cancers. This is 6. Can we begin to even have that cure word as opposed to you're in remission?
We're very careful about what we say about that. We don't want to sort of raise hopes and not be right. But yes, my whole career, when a patient reaches 5 years after their cancer therapy, I say, this is pretty much what cure looks like.
After years of failed treatments, Tammy and Stephen McInerney hoped that their daughter Jordan could be saved in Philadelphia.
We had seen successes with CAR T. We knew other families that had gone through CAR T.
Yeah.
And so we were very hopeful, very, very hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this was Jordan's cure.
A clinical trial offers one last chance.
That phone call is magical.
As cutting-edge research works to save lives.
And I'm really optimistic it's going to happen.
When W5 continues.
Leukemia patient Jordan McInerney is in Philadelphia visiting another fighter, the iconic Rocky Steps and statue. It's a world away from her home of Barrie, Ontario. But she's not here on vacation. She's heading to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, hoping for a miracle. Jordan first came here in 2017 as part of a clinical trial for CAR T-cell therapy. Her immune cells, or her T cells, were extracted from her blood, genetically modified to kill cancer cells, and then injected back into her own bloodstream.
So on June 6th, that was her infusion. She was a little sleepy, so Daddy held her in his arms, and doctor put those T cells in. We just
waited.
sat there thinking about how amazing it was that we made it right here to this moment in time, and that her own body was now going to fight her leukemia.
The McInerneys had an idea of what to expect because other Canadian families had already been through the process. The year before, Cameron Lottie and his parents, Debbie and Richard from Newmarket, Ontario, had also put their hopes in Philadelphia. After Cameron's leukemia came back a second time, his T cells were sent to Philadelphia to see if Cameron could be a candidate for the clinical trial. Within weeks, word came back that he was.
I don't know what it feels like to win the lottery, but that phone call is magical.
Cameron, now 12, has his own recollection of that life-changing trip.
Did you feel like it was ever going to be over?
To my point of view, it felt like it would never be over until I went to Philadelphia to get the T-cell treatment. And when the doctors told me like this, T-cells would like beat the cancer cells.
The treatment worked. There has been no sign of Cameron's cancer for almost 3 years. His initial successful results paved the way for other Canadian patients. Like Jordan, her leukemia has been in remission for nearly 2 years. She's back at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for monitoring. First step, a blood test with Mom Tammy.
I didn't even cry.
No, you didn't.
Dad Stephen joins them for a checkup with her team, Dr. Shannon Maud and nurse practitioner Colleen Callahan. Pediatric oncologist Dr. Shannon Maud has seen a big change in Jordan since her CAR T infusion in 2017.
It's the biggest privilege that there is to be able to see her come back now, talk about being in kindergarten and dance class and doing so well, and to have this time that she's really living a normal childhood.
A normal childhood is now within reach for kids with relapsed leukemia. Dr. Carl June, whose lab at University of Pennsylvania created CAR T-cell therapy, remembers one patient in particular, a young hockey player.
And he lost 4 or 5 inches of linear growth
Right.
because of all the chemotherapy and radiation. And then he went through the CAR therapy, though.
Yeah.
He's played hockey. So that, what he said is he was a goalie. Within 1 month after treatment, he was back on the ice.
Yeah. Catching pucks.
Yeah.
The success of CAR T-cell treatment in trials in kids with leukemia and also adults with B-cell lymphoma has raised the question, where can this personalized therapy, where your own cells become the medicine, go.
Do you see this moving to broader applications of those solid tumors?
We have data in Petri dishes and plastic where CAR T cells will kill every cancer, from pancreatic cancer to ovarian cancer and breast cancer. But each one of them has their own issue. You know, we have to find the Achilles heel for each tumor, and they're different for different tumors, and I'm really optimistic it's going to happen.
CAR T-cell therapy, marketed by drug company Novartis under the brand name Kymriah, was approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in 2017 and is now available in more than 85 treatment centers across the U.S. Health Canada approved Novartis' Kymriah in 2018. That means soon Canadian children whose leukemia doesn't respond to standard treatments like chemotherapy and bone marrow transplants won't have to go to the U.S. at all. But there's one caveat: the cost. Currently, almost 700,000 Canadian dollars per treatment in the U.S. Jordan and Cameron's costs were covered directly by their provincial health plan and the drug company because they were part of a clinical trial.
How many Canadians stand to benefit from this?
We estimated about 50 children would benefit from this over a 3-year period. For adults, the actual numbers is a wider range, and it would be approximately 600 or more.
Dr. Harindra Vijay Sundara is Vice President of Medical Devices and Clinical Interventions at the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health, or CADTH. CADTH advises provincial, territorial, and federal governments on whether they should cover the cost of new drugs and therapies.
And when we look at projected costs, we're looking at $400 million over 3 years? Is that correct?
For the adult indication,
Right.
That's correct. For the indication for children, it was about 25 million.
CADTH recommended that provinces pay for Kymriah, but only if pharmaceutical company Novartis lowers the Canadian price by at least 10% for children with leukemia and 45 to 65% for adults with B-cell lymphoma.
We looked at evidence of its benefit and its cost in both. And the short-term data in both of those indications are very promising, but the impact in children was greater.
If that 10% is not met, or the 40% or more for adults, will that be a deal breaker in terms of us seeing this in Canada?
So our role at CADTH is to provide evidence and recommendations to the negotiators and the ministry. It is now their job to go take those recommendations and participate in active negotiations.
Novartis wouldn't confirm its proposed Canadian price for Kymriah to W5, as it is subject to negotiations, but said this in a statement. The price for Kymriah is currently being finalized. Novartis remains committed to bringing Kymriah to patients in Canada in a sustainable manner. As a one-time treatment, the cost of Kymriah is based on the value it brings to the healthcare system and the society. With more new gene therapies on the way, how a universal health system can support life-saving but expensive innovations is a looming concern. Federal Health Minister Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor is cautiously optimistic.
So with respect to the cost, that's not a part of the approval factor at all. However, we certainly want to make sure that, the price is not going to be, over the top. And as a result of that, there are regulations that are in place in order to look at that. But we also recognize as well that there's budget constraints as well. So we also have to take that into consideration.
But paying for gene therapies like CAR T will be a challenge with varying health systems across Canada.
So we've got 13 provinces and territories. The provincial government certainly have investments to make, and we also have investments to make as the federal government. And together we're going to have to work through this process.
For 12-year-old Cameron Lottie, the treatment is priceless. His cancer has been in remission for almost 3 years. Cameron is now in grade 7 and enjoying all of the things he missed: hanging out with friends, Boy Scouts, even homework. But the years of chemotherapy before he received CAR T in 2016 took their toll on Cameron and on his parents, Richard and Debbie.
3.5 years of chemotherapy on a child that's developing.
Yeah.
We're years from finding out what the side effects of all that, the radiation.
Yeah, I mean, it was remarkable. What can you say, right? You kind of hope that that's the cure in the end.
Jordan McInerney from nearby Barrie, Ontario, had her CAR T-cell treatment in 2017. She was diagnosed with leukemia as a baby. Now 5 years old, she's in school for the first time.
When I was a little girl,
Yeah.
and I couldn't go to school.
But now you're a big girl? And now you get to go to school?
Jordan's parents, Stephen and Tammy, don't take any of her milestones for granted.
How good is it to deal with normal things?
Fantastic.
Yeah, we're pretty pleased with the normal things.
Fight over bedtime?
Yeah. And so people always say, oh, you guys are always so busy, you're always doing stuff. Yeah, because life is short and we miss too much. And those kids have missed too much and they need normal, they need fun.
Yeah.
They need positive everything. So we do all that stuff as much as we can. Yeah.
Well, Health Canada just approved a second CAR T-cell treatment from a competing company. But because both of them are so new, there's no real way of determining yet how effective the technique is in the long run.